Here are the 4 methods to speak like an orator, just like Shakespeare. 1. Practice speaking in front of your camera. Have you ever wondered how your phone camera could help you become a better orator? You probably have thousands of pictures and videos on your phone of memorable moments, but you've likely missed a great opportunity to use that camera to sharpen your intonation, body language, and choice of words. Let me tell you how Racco put this method to work. After one especially rough night, another evening of stumbling over his words with friends and feeling like a total idiot, Racco decided he couldn't keep repeating the same mistakes. He'd read about using a camera to practice speaking, but honestly, it sounded cringy. Talking to a camera alone in my room? Yeah, right, he thought. But the next time he caught himself glaring at his reflection, he realized that feeling stupid and frustrated was even worse. So one night he picked up his phone, propped it up against a stack of books, and hit record. At first it was awkward. He fumbled with what to say, feeling like he was just rambling. He had to resist the urge to cringe at himself. He forced himself through 10 minutes, even though he wanted to shut the camera off after 2. He'd watch the recordings, cringing at the awkward pauses and forced gestures, wondering if this was even worth it. 2 weeks in, Racco hit a breaking point. "What's the point?" he muttered, snapping his laptop shut in frustration. "I sound like a robot. I'll never sound smooth." But something in him refused to quit. He remembered all the times he'd given up too soon and decided that this time he wouldn't. So he hit record again, speaking through gritted teeth, pushing himself past the discomfort. Then one night, something clicked. Racco stood in front of the camera, expecting the usual awkward struggle, but the words flowed a little more smoothly. He spoke about a random topic, but for the first time he didn't feel like he was stumbling. When he watched the playback, he caught himself smiling. It wasn't perfect, but it felt different. Maybe I'm getting the hang of this, he thought. Still, he wasn't sure if it was real progress, so he decided to share a recording with a close friend. He couldn't shake the nervous feeling in his gut as he hit play. "It's probably still terrible," he said, preparing for the worst. But when the video ended, his friend just stared at him before saying, "Dude, you sound like a completely different person. Seriously, what happened?" For the first time in weeks, Racco felt something shift inside him. Pride maybe, or just relief. Either way, it felt good. "Bro, do you have a phone with a camera? It doesn't even have to be a good one. It can be a shitty one. Press record and set your camera somewhere stable so you can film yourself. Now, for the next 10 minutes, try to speak as confidently and eloquently as possible. No one's watching, so be yourself. Just make sure you have some privacy. Focus on using calm, expressive body language that exudes confidence, just like Racco did when he decided to give it a shot." Here are some examples of people using this type of body language, and make sure to use the fanciest words you can find. Instead of saying cell phone, say digital mobile communication device, or instead of watch, say portable time tracking device. Instead of bored, say uninspired. You get the point. Do you see how practicing both body language and eloquence in front of a camera could help you become a magnificent speaker? 2. Obsessive word analysis. Let's dive into the second method, obsessive word analysis. Have you ever read a book and come across words you didn't know? Maybe you didn't have a dictionary handy, or you just weren't motivated to look up the meaning, so you kept reading. That's a pretty common reaction. But there are 2 possible outcomes when you skip looking up those words, and one of them sucks for you. The first outcome is that you intuitively understood the word from the context, and your brain did some deep processing to help you understand it better next time. Cool, right? But the downside, you missed out on a golden opportunity to learn a new word by looking it up, which would allow you to revisit the word in context and put your brain into an insanely effective learning state. Your neurons would be firing and rewiring to create a new peak of intelligence. By skipping that, you basically nerfed your own brain power. For real though, if you start applying this technique even after a few months, the results will be mind-blowing. After 3 months of practicing these techniques, you could start besting your teachers and professors with your upgraded vocabulary. But it gets even better. Those 2 tips are great on their own, but what if you combined them? What if you learned new words through obsessive word analysis, and then practiced those words in your evening recording sessions? This would ingrain those words so deeply in your mind that you'd never forget them. They'd be ready to roll out in any conversation. And just imagine the satisfaction when you do your recording sessions and use those fancy words like a boss, just like Racco. But Racco's experience with combining these methods was a bit of a roller coaster. After a few weeks of recording himself and obsessively analyzing new words, he felt like he was finally getting the hang of it. He was nailing those tough words in front of the camera, and he thought he was ready to test his skills in the real world. So one day, when he met up with his friends, he decided to drop a few of his new vocabulary gems into the conversation, confident that he'd impress everyone. At first, it seemed to be going great. He managed to slip in pedantic while they were talking about a movie critic, and even worked ephemeral into a discussion about their plans for the weekend. But then, one of his friends turned to him, raising an eyebrow. "Racco, why are you talking like that?" she said, smirking. "You sound like a walking dictionary." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. His friend started chuckling, and he felt his face flush with embarrassment. All that practice, all those hours spent perfecting his speech, and now he just felt like a joke. He laughed it off with them, but inside, he was fuming. On his way home that night, he couldn't stop replaying the moment in his head. He felt like ripping up his notebook full of new words and deleting all his practice videos. "I'm done," he muttered under his breath, kicking a loose pebble down the street. "What's the point if everyone thinks I'm a tryhard?" For a moment, it seemed like all his efforts had been for nothing. But as he calmed down, he started to realize something. Maybe it wasn't about throwing fancy words around to sound smart. Maybe he was missing the balance, learning to use those words naturally, without forcing them into every sentence. Racco decided to give it another shot, but this time, he took a different approach. He kept practicing in front of the camera, but he focused on blending the new words with his own natural way of speaking. Instead of trying to cram every big word into a conversation, he practiced using just one or two when they actually made sense. He'd record himself telling stories, dropping in a new word here and there, and then watch it back to see if it felt real or forced. The next time he hung out with his friends, he didn't try to show off. He just let the words come out when they felt right, like he'd been using them his whole life. And this time, nobody raised an eyebrow. In fact, one of his friends even asked him for advice on how to sound more confident when they spoke. Racco couldn't believe it. The method actually worked. It wasn't about throwing out as many big words as possible. It was about mastering the art of subtlety. And now, those words weren't just tools. They felt like part of who he was. So, here's the lesson, bro. If you combine obsessive word analysis with recording your practice sessions, you'll be embedding those new words into your mind so deeply that they'll become second nature. But remember, it's not about showing off. It's about speaking with confidence and authenticity. The next time you're in a conversation, those words will flow out naturally, just like they did for Racco. And you'll know it's not just about learning a few fancy words. It's about becoming the kind of person who can own any room. Tip 4. The ultimate climax. After months of relentless practice, Racco had finally started to feel like he'd cracked the code of communication. He'd mastered his word analysis, polished his recording sessions, and learned the art of blending his vocabulary naturally. But there was one dream that kept him up at night. A vision of speaking to a massive audience, standing on a stage, holding their attention with every word. It was a far cry from the shaky kid he used to be, but he knew that dream wouldn't be complete until he faced it head on. But as the date of a local speaking contest approached, one that could land him in front of a packed theater, his old doubts crept back in, whispering in the back of his mind, "You're not ready. You're just faking it. Shakespeare would wipe the floor with you." It didn't help that every time he looked in the mirror, he imagined Shakespeare's face staring back at him, like some ghostly rival from the past. He could practically hear that old quote rattling in his head. He spoke as if the words themselves bowed down before him. Frustrated and desperate for a breakthrough, Racco did something he hadn't tried before. He scoured the internet, looking for ways to push his mind beyond its limits. That's when he stumbled across my book, IQ Accelerator. At first, he was skeptical. "How's a book going to help me with this?" he muttered. But with the contest only a week away, he figured he had nothing to lose. He downloaded the ebook and dove right in, finding chapters on cognitive exercises, mental focus, and even visualization techniques specifically designed for high-pressure situations. As he read through the pages, Racco realized that mastering eloquence wasn't just about memorizing words or practicing speeches. It was about rewiring his mind to think sharper, faster, and more creatively. It was like unlocking a new level in a game he thought he'd already beaten. Racco started using the exercises every day, squeezing in sessions before and after school. He practiced a mental drill from the book designed to improve focus, timing himself as he visualized delivering his speech flawlessly. And little by little, he noticed his thoughts flowing more easily, his nerves settling as the contest date drew near. The night before the big day, Racco felt the familiar anxiety creeping back in. He turned to the book one last time, flipping to a chapter about channeling nervous energy into passion. He followed the steps, breathing deeply as he visualized the crowd and imagined the energy of their anticipation. He went to bed repeating the mantra from the book, "Speak with your heart, and the mind will follow." When they called his name, he walked onto the stage, his legs feeling like jelly. The lights blinded him, the murmurs of the crowd buzzed in his ears, but he took a deep breath and began. At first, the words stumbled out of him, rough and unpolished, but then he saw a few people leaning in, listening intently, and suddenly, he found his rhythm. He spoke about the struggle, about feeling like an imposter, about the night spent talking to a camera, about the ghost of Shakespeare always hovering over his shoulder. And when he reached the end, Racco locked eyes with the audience, smiling at the memory of that smug, imaginary rival. He finished with a line that wasn't Shakespeare's, but his own. "Maybe I'm not the guy whose words bow down before him, but I'm the guy who kept speaking when it felt like no one was listening." The crowd was silent for a heartbeat, and then they erupted into applause. Racco's chest heaved as the realization hit him. He'd done it. He'd faced his biggest fear, not by being like Shakespeare, but by being true to himself. And for the first time, he didn't feel like he was competing with a ghost. He felt like he'd finally stepped out of the shadow. And that's how Racco turned his dream into reality. He took the techniques from the book, IQ Accelerator, and made them his own. It wasn't magic. It was about learning to push past his limits and find his own voice. And now, you can do the same. The exercises and methods that helped Racco are waiting for you in the book. There's a link in the description and a pinned comment below. Download it, and who knows, maybe the next time you face your own stage, you'll be the one owning the room too. So what happened to Racco's story and his rivalry with Shakespeare? Legend has it that after Racco's name became famous worldwide as the most influential speaker since Shakespeare, something strange happened. One quiet evening, as Racco rehearsed in an empty theater, the air around him grew cold. A faint, otherworldly whisper filled the room, and there before him stood a translucent figure, Shakespeare himself, back from the dead, floating with an eerie glow. The long-lost bard challenged Racco to a duel, not with swords but with words, an ancient English traditional speaking ritual known only to the most legendary orators. The stakes? Eternal glory. It said the duel went on for hours, each syllable charged with centuries of wisdom and wit. In the end, Racco stood victorious, earning Shakespeare's eternal respect, and the ghostly figure of the bard faded away with a smirk saying, "Well played, young one, well played." Now the question is, will you be next to challenge the bard?